Blackwood Manor stood ominously at the edge of town, its towering structure casting long shadows over the neglected garden. The house had been vacant for decades, a relic of a bygone era, until the Johnson family decided to make it their new home. Martha and David Johnson, along with their two children, Emily and Ben, were thrilled to move into the grand old mansion. From the moment they set foot in Blackwood Manor, an eerie chill seemed to hang in the air. The walls whispered with the echoes of the past, and the floorboards creaked with secrets long buried. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, the Johnsons began to settle in, excited about their new life in the historic house. It wasn't long before strange occurrences began to plague the family. At first, it was small things. Doors opening and closing on their own, distant footsteps echoing through the halls, and cold drafts in rooms with no windows open. Martha dismissed these as the quirks of an old house, but Emily and Ben were less convinced. One night, as Emily lay in bed, she heard soft sobbing coming from the attic. Curious and a bit frightened, she climbed the creaky stairs, each step amplifying her fear. When she reached the attic, she saw a figure in the corner, shrouded in darkness. The sobbing ceased, and the figure slowly turned to face her, revealing hollow, sorrowful eyes. Emily screamed and fled back to her room, her heart pounding in her chest. The next morning, Emily told her parents about the figure in the attic. David reassured her, saying it was probably a trick of the light or her imagination. But Martha couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She decided to investigate the history of Blackwood Manor. Martha visited the local library and dug through old records and newspapers. She discovered that the mansion had a dark past. In the early 1900s, it had been owned by the Blackwood family, who mysteriously disappeared one night, never to be seen again. Rumors of murder and madness surrounded their disappearance, and the house had been considered cursed ever since. Armed with this knowledge, Martha returned home, her mind racing. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard a faint, ghostly melody playing from the old piano in the living room. She nudged David awake, and together they crept downstairs. The piano played itself, keys moving without a visible hand. The air grew cold, and a sense of dread filled the room. Suddenly, the music stopped, and a voice echoed through the house. "Leave this place," it whispered, chilling them to the bone. David and Martha exchanged terrified glances. They knew they had to leave, but selling the house would take time, and they had nowhere else to go. Over the next few days, the haunting intensified. Shadows moved on their own. Objects flew across rooms, and ghostly apparitions appeared and vanished. One evening, as David was working in his study, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. He turned, but no one was there. The sensation of being watched grew stronger, and David knew they couldn't stay any longer. Desperate, Martha sought the help of a local historian who specialized in the paranormal. The historian, Mr. Hawkins, visited the manor and immediately sensed the malevolent presence. He explained that the spirits of the Blackwood family were trapped in the house, their tragic end binding them to the manor. Mr. Hawkins suggested a cleansing ritual to release the spirits. That night, they gathered in the living room, where the piano stood silent. Mr. Hawkins began the ritual, chanting ancient incantations. The temperature dropped, and a fierce wind whipped through the house. The shadows coalesced into the forms of the Blackwood family, their faces twisted in anguish. As Mr. Hawkins continued the ritual, the spirits let out a collective wail, a sound of unbearable sorrow and anger. One by one, they dissolved into the air, leaving behind an overwhelming silence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The next morning, the Johnson family packed their belongings and left Blackwood Manor. They moved to a small, modern house on the other side of town, grateful to leave the haunted past behind. The manor stood empty once more, its dark history fading into legend. Years later, as the Johnsons recounted their experience to friends, they often wondered about the fate of Blackwood Manor. Some say the house still stands, waiting for its next inhabitants. Others believe it has finally found peace. But those who dare to approach its gates swear they can still hear the faint, ghostly melody of the piano echoing through the night.